Do you ever find yourself browsing the same sample folders over and over again, using the same kicks and snares, while 90% of your sample library remains unused, gathering dust? If that's you, then you probably need a sample manager. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at the top sample managers on the market today, testing them out and comparing their features so that you can find the perfect sample manager for you. But very quickly, if you're looking to bring your production skills to the next level in just 12 weeks, check out our Producer Launchpad program. This is our brand new personalized music development course with one-on-one tutoring, your very own growth strategy session, and a lot more. If you're interested, check out the link below. And while you're at it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button to let other people know we exist. And with that out of the way now, let's get into it. So what is a sample manager? In essence, it's a program that runs inside or outside of your DAW that will analyze your entire sample library and then tag it, organize it, so that you can find and search samples much more efficiently. So here I've brought up ADSR Sample Manager, which will be the first sample manager I look at. Now, sample managers have a lot of different features and different ways of tagging your sample library, and that's what we'll get into in this video. Namely, I'm going to be looking at the following things when comparing these sample managers. First off, does it integrate in your DAW or not? Secondly, how does the sample manager tag your samples? So how does it analyze and assign various characteristics to your samples? Third, I'm going to look obviously at the price. Fourth, I'm going to look at if the sample manager lets you manipulate or work with your samples in any creative way. And finally, I'm going to look at any other features that the sample manager might have. So let's get started with our first sample manager, which is ADSR Sample Manager. This sample manager works either within your DAW as a plugin, which is the case right here in FL Studio, or you can use it as a standalone app outside of your DAW. Secondly, how does ADSR Sample Manager analyze your sample library? It does so by analyzing the names of your samples and then assigning tags. So, for example, if I search for crash here, the search results will bring all the samples with crash in the name. Now, as we'll see later, this is not ideal because if you have a sample, for example, a vocal, which just says atmosphere in A minor, and it's actually a vocal, well, ADSR Sample Manager will not recognize that sample as a vocal. There is a workaround, which I'll talk about later, but that's something to keep in mind. ADSR Sample Manager simply uses the name of your samples to assign tags and to let you search. Now let's quickly look at the interface of ADSR Sample Manager. On the left here is your sample folder or sample folders. I have one master folder called samples and then all the different sample folders inside. In the center is your search results. So here I've typed in pad and these are all the samples that have pad in their name. This represents a loop and this would represent a one shot. If I only want the one shots here, or if I only want loops, here I only have loops. ADSR Sample Manager then assigns a BPM and a key to each sample. Now this again is based on the information in the sample. So you'll see, for example, here, BB pad loop 08. There's no information regarding the key. And so that information is actually missing here. And then you have tags that are assigned to each sample. So for example, bass, pad, vocals in this case. Let's check this one out. This sample does indeed have vocals in it. When it comes to the key, you can also filter by key by just selecting the key you want. You can favorite any samples. So for example, let's say I like this one and this one and this one. These samples will then end up in your favorites collection, which you can access here. At the bottom here, you have the sample you've selected that opens up in waveform. One really cool thing is the ability to just select a part of the sample you like. You can enable loop mode here just so that it loops. Let's do a little fade in like this and fade out like this. You also have two filters here, a high pass filter and a low pass filter. And you also have a key selection, which is really handy to make the sample fit directly in the key of your track. So coming back to tags, you can of course add your own tags. You can favorite samples, I mentioned that, and you can create your own collections. So I mentioned how ADSR Sample Manager uses the name of the sample to assign tags. So one solution you can use to remedy this is to use a batch renamer. So here I'm using the program File Renamer, but there are a bunch of different programs you can use if you're on Mac or Windows or whatever. And this lets you batch rename samples. I have here a bunch of files without the name vocal in here. And what I'm going to do is simply insert vocal dash, select all, and then preview. And now the new file names will include vocal. When I'm back in ADSR Sample Manager, if I type in vocal, that's actually going to bring up these samples. Now this can seem a bit tedious, but most samples will actually have the correct words in the name of the sample, so you don't need to do this that often. And regarding the price, ADSR Sample Manager is free. Right, so next up on our list is Cosmos by Waves. Cosmos is a standalone app, so this means it will not run inside your DAW. This also means you can't synchronize your samples while playing them with your project in your DAW, for example. However, Cosmos offers a bunch of amazing features. So firstly, you have three main views. The waveform view, which shows you what the samples actually look like, a list view, and then you have the cluster view, which is probably what Cosmos is most famous for. So the cluster view actually lets you find samples similar to each other. So I find this actually works great when you're looking for a snare or a kick. And now if I like this sample, I can simply explore similar samples around it. Another great thing about Cosmos is that, unlike ADSR Sample Manager, Cosmos actually uses AI to analyze your samples and then assign tags and categories to them. So for example, here I'm searching for snare, and it's clearly bringing up some samples which don't have a snare in the sound. Now it's not perfect, so let's say this sound here. I guess you could say it's a snare. At least Cosmos identified it as a snare. Another thing that's great is that Cosmos assigns a bunch of different tags to all your samples and then recommends them here, a bit like when you're searching for a sample in Splice. So here I've searched for a snare and it's recommending a bunch of other tags I can use to filter down. I could select acoustic if I absolutely want an acoustic snare. So this actually works pretty well. We can definitely hear these are acoustic snares, even though there's no information that it's an acoustic snare in the name of the sample. So in terms of tagging, you can see there's a bunch of other tags that I can use to filter down here. Cosmos is definitely a lot more powerful. Now, what it lacks, in my opinion, is that there's absolutely zero sample manipulation here. So if I have a huge pad loop or an ARP loop, there's no way to cut it or slice it, reverse it, whatever, before dragging it into my DAW. So Cosmos does one thing really well, which is analyze and sort your samples, but that's pretty much it. Now, just like ADSR Sample Manager, you have a difference between loop and one-shot. So let's say I only want one-shots, I can select it here. You can also favorite samples by simply clicking the little star here, and then you can create your own collections. So let's say this snare reverb here, I want to add it to a huge snares folder. Just select here, and now it's added. Finally, in terms of price, Cosmos comes in at around $30. Right, so next up is Sononym. This is also a standalone app, so it will not work inside your DAW. It is by far the most advanced and detailed analysis and tagging of your samples, and I'll show you why in a second. So just like Cosmos, Sononym uses AI to analyze the sound of each sample and then determine if it's a pad, if it's a drum hit, etc. So here, these are all the samples that come up for the keyword pad. You have the class here, if it's a loop or a one-shot. You have different categories, the length of the sample, the note, BPM. If I extend the bottom here, you actually have a bunch of categories that Sononym identifies by itself. So let's say I want to add noise and distortion as a filter. Now I only have pads with the filter noise and distortion. So these will be noisy pads. And then I can use these filters here to narrow down exactly what I want. So for example, the note range here, you also have things like brightness here, harmonicity. So is the sample harmonious or is it dissonant? Let me just remove all these filters for now and show you what is probably the killer feature of Sononym, and this is the similarity search. So let's say I've searched for a pad, I found this one that I like. So I can just hit here, search by similarity, and when it's done, you have a list of samples here which are considered similar to the one I selected. And you also have similarity on different dimensions. So that's what you see here. You have the overall similarity, but then you have similarity in terms of frequency spectrum, in terms of timbre, pitch, and amplitude. So let's say I have this pad here, and I'm searching something that's really similar in terms of timbre. I can simply select timbre here. And now Sononym has reorganized these samples to show me first the samples that are most similar in terms of timbre. And by the way, in the previous video I published, I was talking about timbre and somebody actually told me it's called timbre. I've always said timbre, so it's going to be hard to change now. Instead of adding a bunch of EQs and compressors to get exactly the snare you want, you can use the similarity function here to really filter down and search precisely what you're looking for. Like most sample managers, you can favorite given samples, you can create your own libraries, you can adjust categories. But one thing you've probably noticed is that there's no sample manipulation, but there's no way to trim them, filter them, or do any creative work. And also in terms of price, Sononym comes in at around $100. So in my opinion, Sononym works great if you have an absolutely massive sample library where you really need to filter down and search very precisely for sounds and get exactly what you want. For me, this is really where Sononym shines with its similarity search, but at $100, it's of course a big commitment. All right, next up is EXO by XLN Audio. And right out the gate, you can see that this is a way more advanced plugin than any other on this list. Now, one thing I'll mention straight away is that this is strictly for beat making. You can use some one-shots like chord stabs, but it's really designed to create beats. So loops, for example, won't work here. Now, I could do a whole video on EXO. And by the way, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a full tutorial. Honestly, it's one of the most fun plugins to play with, but I'll just cover a few of the features here. First off, EXO works either as a plugin within your DAW or a standalone app. It uses AI to identify what your samples are, so you don't need to have clap or snare in the name of the sample for EXO to know that it's a snare or a clap. And the price is $129, so quite a commitment. But as you'll see, it's one of the most advanced plugins on this list. So first, when you search for samples, you also have this cluster view. Let's say I settle on this sample, I simply click here, and now it's loaded. So this is for searching samples. Now, if we go into the Edit tab, EXO has 8 different slots to create your beats. And then for each slot, you have advanced editing options up here. So for example, panning, the envelope of the sound, pitch here, you have a low cut and a high cut. You can edit the sample by going in here. You also have 2 sends here. So send 1 and send 2. And this applies FX1 and FX2 to this sample. I can add some reverb to this kick. Okay, that's a bit too much. I can also adjust this reverb with these settings here. So already you can see how EXO is much more than just a sample manager. This is where you actually create your beat. So this is the pattern for my kick. Let me just play the whole beat as it is now. So one thing I really like is this nudge button here. So here I have a clap on the 2nd and 4th beat. Let's give it a listen, and I'm just going to nudge the clap so it doesn't hit precisely on the kick. So obviously that's a bit too much, but simply nudging here is a classic trick people use so that you can hear your clap more clearly. and so that the transients don't hit precisely with the kick. Now there's a bunch of other features which I don't have time to get into here. The sample combiner lets you just load up random samples that XO thinks work well together. And finally, when you're happy with your beat, you have a bunch of different export options at your disposal. You can export your beat as a MIDI, so simply dragging here, and now I can further adjust my beat in the piano roll if I want. You can export as a wave, you can export as a raw kit, and now I have my raw kit here with all the hits that I've selected and processed. So honestly, XO is a bunch of fun to work with. As I mentioned, it's quite expensive and it's only tailored to beat making, so it won't work with any loops or extended melodic samples. But if you're into beat making, this is a super cool plugin to try out. Finally on our list is Loopcloud. Now this is a standalone app which you can actually sync to your DAW with the Loopcloud plugin right here. So this will synchronize loops or samples that you demo with your project. So Loopcloud also analyzes the sound of each sample to determine what type of sound it is and to assign tags to it. You've got a search bar up here, so let me type in clap. One thing that's really cool with Loopcloud are these audio filters on the right. They really let you narrow down on the type of sound you're searching. So here in terms of claps, I could really focus on high frequency claps. And you've just seen there how Loopcloud instantly reloads based on the filter. Let's say I want a really long decay. So let me filter down to at least 2 seconds. And in this sample folder, I only have this sample with 2 seconds decay. You can also filter by key here at the top. So let's say I'm only searching for sounds in E minor. And now I have pads in this folder that are in E minor. What I can also do is here at the bottom, select the key of my track and then press lock. And now all the samples that I demo would be pitched to E minor. Loopcloud also offers a bunch of editing functions, which are actually quite advanced. So first off, you have effects here, where you can add a bunch of different effects. So let's say an EQ and then maybe some reverb. You can also automate your effects. So here I've selected the reverb. So here I'm automating the size of the reverb. Going back to the sample, there's a bunch of other tools you can use to reverse, pitch, slice. I can, let's say, split this section here. I could pitch this section, let's say 7 semitones up. And then this section, I could pitch it maybe an octave down. So honestly, you can have a lot of fun here with the effects, but also chopping up, rearranging, reversing, pitching certain parts of your loops. Now, one thing that's really cool is that once you've chopped up your sample here, you can actually apply this to any other sample. So let me load up this sample here. Pretty cool, right? And finally, if you want to play with different samples at the same time, you can simply add tracks here at the bottom. So you can even stay within Loopcloud and already create a reasonably good sketch. Loopcloud works with a subscription-based model, which starts at $7 a month. And with that, you actually get credits, which you can use on the Loopcloud store. So this wraps up our review of the best sample managers out there. Let me know in the comments down below if you use a sample manager, and if so, which one. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.